So welcome to another episode of Almost Got It. Today we are going to discuss artificial hearts. We're going to touch on consciousness and the surprising science-based view of rebirth. And as usual, our focus here is to explore what's happening as we move towards this technological singularity, to look at how can we do sense making both practically day to day, but also the implications for humanity and consciousness and AI and all of this. And per usual, you have your host, Dilan, and myself, Ben. Dilan is an engineer, an entrepreneur, MIT alum, an ex-Googler, ex-YC member, a burner, a Sri Lankan, and a cat father.
Importantly, yeah. And Ben also, who's a computer scientist who exited to Google and used to be the CEO of the famed Esalen Institute in Big Sur, and has spent a decade now as a CEO coach, coaching some of the most prominent entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and also the father to a beautiful little child. Before we start, remember to subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, etc., and leave a comment. Tell us what you like and don't like. All right, let's get going. So, really exciting story to start with this week. We have an Australian man in his 40s became the first patient in the world to be discharged from the hospital after getting an artificial heart transplant. Now, in the past, artificial hearts have been used as a stopgap measure until they were able to find a donor heart that is compatible with someone who needs a heart. But now, for the first time, an artificial heart has lasted in someone, and this person has lived for over 105 days now. And this is really exciting, Ben, because there's a huge shortage, as a lot of people know, in organ donors, right? And then so many people, like heart disease is one of the most common, if not the most common, cause of death, I think, after accidents and stuff like that. And now this kind of technology allows us to overcome those shortages and potentially, a heart is also one of the most complex body parts that one could imagine creating artificially. And now we have a heart that could potentially be a permanent solution to someone who needs a heart.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack this a little bit. I think on the personal side, and the bad pun here is the heartwarming side. I know it's
hopefully the heart will not warm too much.
Right. Yeah. Well,
it runs off a battery, actually. So that is a problem, I guess, they had to solve.
I mean, I have a 5-year-old. I have a license to dad joke. So
that's great.
But there are a few things I really like. So one is just hearing the story about Daniel Timms, the founder and the heart surgeon who created this and actually performed the transplant. One of the things he's known for actually sleeping by the patient's bedside after the surgery, just to monitor them and do things like that. So he flew into Australia, did this for the patient, and stayed there. And from a numbers perspective, why this is significant is there are only 6,000 transplants performed each year globally, mm-hmm. but there's demand for almost 100,000. So this, immediately impacts a lot of lives.
Absolutely.
And when you take a look at the actual device, it's really, to me, it looks just like a turbo off a car, right? I mean, that's how it works. The little impeller and the whole thing, and apparently it makes a whoosh noise.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this, and it sort of reminds me of the Fast and the Furious movies, right? You get your heart transplant, now you can go race Vin Diesel. So I spent all night writing that joke.
No, it is pretty wild. And I saw this quote from the patient that he literally had trouble walking to the toilet after before the heart transplant, and now he's been discharged with this heart transplant, and
and now is 0 to 60 time rivals of Ferrari.
He's running to the toilet apparently, and
Right, exactly.
but he's going grocery shopping. He's going to the gym, and so there's this is close to heart. Oh, well, that's
well,
right.
and plus because it's also a hybrid, right? It's also powered by electrical. He comes with a sticker now that lets him go into the carpool lane. So
yeah. But so I have a friend who actually went through a heart transplant at the Stanford hospital not too long ago, probably like 3 months ago.
Our age or
our
older?
age, yeah, a little bit younger actually. It is pretty wild, and he I think had a condition that just like his heart was kind of always going to be weak, and then it just like started weakening really fast, and they decided that doing a heart transplant was the right way to go, and it was obviously like a really, really big deal. And I can also can imagine the after a heart transplant, your life expectancy is not what it's about, like I don't know, like something like 10 to 20 years or something like this, and just like completely changes your world, and so any progress made in this space is really meaningful to a lot of people.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I mentioned it to you, but I lost a good friend just last month, 45 in great health. And she just, went to sleep and didn't wake up. And so, it's weird to feel like we're transitioning in this phase of our lives. And I mean, I just started a statin for heart disease. And I think this is one useful thing that I'd love you to do, actually, Dilan, is the Clearly scan. I don't know if you ever, did you ever?
I'm planning to,
Okay, good. Yeah. And for, everyone that listens to this, Clearly scan does analysis of your heart, and it can see if you have early stages of heart disease. And so at my age, at 41, it's highly unusual for there to be any plaque buildup, and it's there, but at this phase where it's still soft plaque and not hard plaque, it's theoretically reversible with changes to diet and exercise. So I can't recommend a test like this enough, even though it's $1,500. I just, if you think about adding potentially many years or even decades to your life, it's important to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so one question I have about your friend who went through the heart transplant is that often there are these reports of when people get a new organ, they start feeling different feelings. Like in some sense, it changes their experience of reality or changes their consciousness.
Yes. Yeah. I actually asked my friend about this. It's like really fascinating. I don't think he has felt anything like that so far. But I was looking up what stories exist out there. There's one famous story of a former professional dancer, Claire Sylvia, who received a heart from an 18-year-old boy who died in a motorcycle accident. And after surgery, she developed cravings for beer and
compulsively look at for beer and pornography.
Close. Beer and KFC fried chicken, and it's amazing, right? And she's like, I've never craved these things before, and she didn't even know that this kid had these cravings, and now like she just like she's just having these cravings. And and her daughter commented that she now walked like a man.
Wow. Now, did they track it down? Did this 18-year-old boy love KFC and beer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and in a way, this makes sense, right? Because what I was generally taught is the brain and all the control systems are up here at the top of the head, and then the heart is just an organ. But and I think we even talked about this on an earlier podcast that there's like 85, 87 million neurons in the heart. It's about as much processing power as a mouse's brain. And it's deeply connected in the rest of your system. So there is thinking and processing that occurs there, right? I mean, people have a sense of what their heart is quote unquote feeling, right?
Yeah. And this is exactly right. And clearly it seemed like memories are stored not just in neurons in your brain, but throughout neurons in your entire body. And it's almost like when a heart is transplanted, these neurons kind of like leak memories back into the overall system. It's wild. I was reading another story of a college professor, 56-year-old guy who received a heart from a police officer who was killed by a gunshot wound to his face. And after the transplant, this college professor started having dreams of a bright light flashing on his face. And again, when they traced this back, they found out that this is how the police officer died, which is like, isn't that wild?
So the professor had no prior knowledge of who the heart came from or the cause of death, correct, or any of that. It just showed up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because these are things that in certain circles, it's just known and understood, right? I mean, when I was purely in tech, right, I looked at my body as just a convenient means of transporting my brain to meetings, right? And as I began to look at Esalen, at body, mind, and meditation, all these sorts of things, there's this whole body of work around how this is all an integrated system. I mean, there's a concept, there's a book, Body Mind, where they look at body and mind as one organism, which it really is, right? There's never really been a brain that's grown without it being attached to the body. There's usually, I think there's only two synaptic connections, like maximum, maybe three, separating any nerve in the body from the brain. And there's so much processing power, right? There's as many neurons in the heart as a mouse's brain. There's as many neurons in the gut as a cat's brain. We talk about it all the time, like we have a gut feel or an instinct or an intuition, or your heart's in it or your heart's not in it. And then even this whole category of things like the body keeps the score, like Peter Levine or Bessel van der Kolk's work, is all around this notion that trauma and memories and things like that are held in the body. And I've seen pretty extraordinary work when you work with individuals from that lens.
Yeah. There's a lot of mystery there, and I do also wonder, like, so then if we're, when you transplant a biological heart with a mechanical one, obviously, which doesn't come with a bunch of neurons, right? Are you missing out on something? Or do you like? Of course, the heart functions as it should, but is that like? Does it take away from some amount of the human experience that you would have with a biological heart?
I mean, to me, I think that's a tremendous question that, as this rolls out, should probably be researched, right? Like, it would make sense to me if you lost those neurons, that maybe the way that you feel is different, and yet can you even have awareness that something's missing, right? I mean, we talked about this notion of feeling like yourself or not feeling like yourself. Are you gonna? Is it gonna be like there's a phantom limb there, or something?
But it is very exciting that technology is making progress at a rapid pace, and I think something like a heart transplant or needing a heart transplant might not be a life or death situation for people. I mean, like knee transplants are actually a kind of a good example here, Ben. I know your mom went through double knee replacement, or
Single, but yeah.
single. Okay, yeah. But the funny thing is, this used to be something kind of terrifying and something that people would try to avoid at all costs. But now it's transitioning to a new reality where it's almost considered better to get the double knee transplant, and you actually add years to your life, and because you can be like really active and healthy, and do all the things I used to do, as opposed to dealing with wear and tear of your biological knees. And so that's remarkable, and this is already happening. And some point is that might be the direction where the heart might head as well.
Right. So you replace the knees, and then you replace the heart, and then you replace the kidney, and then you ask, is this still my body? Right? Like it's at some point you've replaced the whole thing with a humanoid.
Yep. The ship of Theseus analogy is definitely happening. How's your I was actually surprised to see from person, like your mom is the first person that I experienced that had the knee replacement surgery, and she seemed to be doing far better than before the surgery. And and that's like really it's still surprising to me that there's like a mechanical knee that is powering her like very active and healthy lifestyle now.
I think it's definitely better in certain ways. It hasn't been as clean a recovery as they made it out to be. One of the things that we've learned, or at least this is my mom's interpretation, is that it's standard protocol to lie, like explicitly lie to the client about or the patient about the duration of recovery. So they tell you it's 6 months, but then it's actually a year, and she's, I don't know, a year and a half out or something like that, or maybe even 2 years out, still deals with a lot of pain and tightness and things like that.
Is it possible that there's a lot of variation there? A lie is a strong word. It might be that that
I mean, they asked the doctor about that, and this was what the doctor said. The doctor said, if we told you how long it would actually take, most people wouldn't do it, even though their net quality of life improves. And I believe it has for her, right? But if she knew it would be as hard and painful as it was, knowing my mom, who's avoidant of pain, she probably would not have done it.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, is it yeah.
I mean, this is a moral question, Dylan. I'm interested in your view on that.
Yeah, no, it's is it okay to somewhat misguide someone if it's going to be better for them long term? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I probably not, but probably most people will kind of end up doing the right thing anyway if they knew that their quality of life is going to be better, and it's clearly better for your mom. And so
to me, one of the questions that I wanted to explore with you about this is that we just keep getting better and better at avoiding death, right? And so it begins to get very unclear, right, about when someone dies. Like if their heart doesn't work, we can replace it, or we can manually pump it. If their lungs don't work, we can breathe those. If they can't eat, we can inject nutrients, right? So that we can basically run every system of the body. And so when does death occur in your view?
Man, easy questions, right?
Just wait till I get to the hard ones.
Yeah, this I don't know, the at least instinctive memory that question brings to me is my experience with 5-MeO-DMT, which is a pretty potent psychedelic compound that comes from a toad venom.
Yeah, the
It's
Sonoran toad.
yeah, and this is something that um you inhale, and like the vaporized compound, and you have this near death experience. NDE is actually like I think it's like an acronym for this too, because it's just like such a profound experience, and a lot of people tend to end up having very positive after effects, because it's almost like you get past that fear, and everything else maybe seem easier and more peaceful and calm. And that experience is incredibly jarring. It feels like um, your entire being is kind of turned inside out in a split second, and you're confronted with this, the white light scenario, and then like your being and self kind of being put back together. Yeah, I've had this experience a couple of times in the past, and each time it's been very profound, and I have deep respect for it. um
So walk me through the experience beginning to end, just for folks who aren't familiar. Like, how do how does this happen that you end up in a place where you can smoke this, and then what occurs? How long does it take? Can you sort of
yeah.
set the
So
scene?
yeah, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know the origins of this psychedelic. I'd be really curious to look up. But the way I have come across this modality is um, hearing about it from friends and other kind of like, and there's a bunch of research actually being done about 5-MeO DMT as well. It's really compelling as a therapeutic modality because it's one of the shortest acting psychedelics. The whole experience lasts maybe 15 minutes, as opposed to like an acid trip that lasts like, I don't know, 12 plus hours, right? And 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 yeah, so the experience ideally is guided by an experienced shaman or practitioner, and they know the exact dose that you need based on your body weight and stuff like that. And um and typically you inhale it through a vaporizer, or like a pipe where you kind of like put this compound in there and heat it up. And so the whole experience is very quick, about 15 minutes, end to end. You sit down, and you take a few deep breaths, and you kind of do kind of like some practice runs, kind of practice inhaling from this pipe, and then they would give it to you, and then you take this one big inhale, and just like goes inside you, and you immediately feel that like, holy shit, like this is going to be a ride. And um and um and a split second later, the shaman would make you lay down, and everything just like is gone, right? Like your ego is completely dissolved, and you just completely lose sense of any self at all. And that is the part that is quite jarring and incredibly profound. And then you feel like this sort of your entire self being put together piece by piece, gradually, and you kind of emerge out of this nothingness. And um and that is really beautiful. And after that, there is this sort of intense physiological sensation that lasts for like 15 minutes. A lot of people find this to be pleasurable, some people not. And
As I recall, the last time you did this, you found it quite
Yeah, I
pleasurable.
found it
If
to be
you
orgasmic. I was having the best time ever. And yeah, it's incredible. And there's like this way psychedelics tend to work by bringing perspective. Depression typically is tied to a heightened sense of self, and importance, tied to everything that you're doing, right? And everything, like things that are not going well in your life, seem like the I like
that was
feel
the
like the end
most
of the
PG
world.
telling of that story ever, Dylan. Come on.
Yeah, I did. Yes, I did. The last time I did this, I did rip off my my clothes and had this like whole orgasmic experience where it was great. It was
The nurses thought it was great too.
yeah, the nurses thought it was quite hot. It was hilarious, but it wasn't like, yeah, it wasn't like, when I say orgasmic, it's not like a sexual orgasm. It's much more like a a pure joy emerging out of like some kind of within myself type experience. And yeah, you just ideally you end up blissed out with a lot of gratitude and and compassion and so on. So yeah, it's a really powerful substance.
And so bring this back around on the substance. How does this relate to that, the end of life or the lack of clarity around death?
You know, no one knows, right? There are, yeah, I mean, I would, my guess would be that when the brain basically shuts down, or like the neuron, when neurons die is when you probably die. And the reason to um, say that is because the bundle of neurons that most of the neurons that that are in your body survive your entire lifetime. Like if you live 100 years, the neurons are there for 100 years, whereas almost every other cell turns over very, very rapidly. Every 7 years or so, your entire body is made of like different new cells, except the neurons and some other cells as well. But that's pretty remarkable. And when those neurons die, is probably when death occurs. And there's a lot of mystery around there, but that's what I would think. And the 5-MeO DMT experience maybe is relatable in that sense that it seemed to put your entire nervous system, at least for a split second, in a state where it's you just kind of, it's like a reboot, right? And maybe that's what creates that white light experience and all that stuff.
Well, I mean, just to challenge that for a second, my meditation teacher, Daniel P. Brown, who, luminary Harvard professor, chaired 2 departments in psychology, and avid practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, he used to say to us, there's no dying to be done. Right. And in this Buddhist view, consciousness exists outside of any physical experience. Right. And so to me, there's this interesting lack of clarity of, do you have this materialist view that when the body dies, that's it, you're gone, which is how my parents view it, or that there's something that exists outside and beyond that, which from my own empirical testing of these Buddhist practices, like every single one of the things that they said were true so far for me that I've been able to personally test have been true. So to me, it would be a little bit weird that they would be so wrong about this one.
Well, I would push back on
thing.
that. I don't think so. There are different interpretations of these things, right? There's to my knowledge, there's absolutely, like, there's no teaching in Buddhism, at least core Buddhism, that separate consciousness from the physical body in the sense that it exists somewhere outside, right? Now there is this notion that consciousness emerges from processes that are going on in your body. There's a subtle but really important difference, right? Like if consciousness is emergent, then you could say that consciousness is somewhat like essentially separate from the body. It's like you can't really, by tracing, how individual neurons are firing, you can't really trace consciousness. But at the same time, it is emergent from those processes. It's not like something that exists outside, right? That's the point of view that I would take. And yeah, so that's I think that's my interpretation of the Buddhist teachings there.
Well, the Dzogchen practices that I follow, that their view is that all experience, right? And there are three types of experience that you can have as a human, right? At the highest level, you can have a sensory experience, right? Sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, interoception, proprioception, that sort of experience. You can have a thought or you can have an emotion, right? And that's it. That's the entirety of experience. And they say that event side of things, the liveliness aspect of human, co-arises with the awareness aspect, right? That we sort of, the West has it wrong that there's thinking about thinking. It's more like there's just an awareness that's there, and that is in a sense the consciousness. But it's unclear that when that co-arising ends for the body, that the consciousness goes away, right? I think their view, I mean, didn't you talk about it in the Buddha would talk about like one candle lighting another candle?
Yeah. There's this really, really intriguing possibility. Well, there's kind of like a bigger topic which we can talk about. So one thing that I find to be incredibly intriguing about Buddhism is, or Buddha's teachings is that there a lot of what the Buddha taught is empirical observation of nature. He was like a very good empirical observer, really smart guy.
Which there's another word for this, which is scientist.
Yeah, he was a scientist. Yeah, he was essentially a
right?
scientist.
He was an early scientist.
He was an early scientist. Yeah, and so if you read original Buddhism, original text of teachings of the Buddha, almost everything kind of makes sense, and it's empirical observation, except there are a couple of things that just stand out as outliers, right? And these outliers are really, really intriguing to me personally. One of those outliers is that this concept of rebirth that Buddha talks about. And what's particularly intriguing here is that, a concept of like sort of rebirth, reincarnation already existed since probably the beginning of time. People, thought about like this type of thing, maybe this type of thing is happening and whatnot. But it was always thought about as like sort of like the soul that is kind of, is inside everyone's sort of being, and then like the soul sort of like flies over to some other body and then like, implants itself, that type of thing, right? Whereas the Buddha very, very, very precisely defines rebirth. The analogy he gives is like you were saying, it's like one candle lighting another candle, like one candle going off while lighting another candle. Now, he specifically says that there's no soul. Like anatma is the Pali word for this. Anatma means like there's literally no soul, right? So he denies the existence of a soul. However, he does allude to or talk about transmission of some quanta of information from one being at their death to another being that is being born. So this is really intriguing. And so and in my interpretation, and if this is something that is actually happening, is that this sounds exactly like a transfer of information, right? Like just imagine sort of like one AI being shut down and transferring some amount of their the weights that make up the AI into another AI, right? And this is like nothing material, nothing physical has been transferred, but information has been transferred, and
Yeah.
that is an intriguing possibility.
So I want to slow down and unpack all of this a little bit. So first, I think there's a few reasons that you're qualified to even talk about this, right? So one is if you tell me a little bit about the history of just in a sentence or two, but the history, the relationship with Buddhism and Sri Lanka, your home country where you grew up.
Yeah. So I grew up in Sri Lanka, and I studied Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, for 12 years, and went pretty deep in it. I used to speak Pali and understand it, be able to read it. And Pali is the original language that the Buddha spoke when he was alive, 2000 some years ago, and furthermore, so when the Buddha was alive, there was no, a lot of people actually don't know this. There was no written language, right? Like everything was an oral tradition, and which is remarkable by itself. When there's no writing, you're severely limited by the amount of information that you can carry and process and so on, right? And when Buddha was alive, they spoke Pali. There was no written tradition, but they passed on information by memorizing it and then chanting, right? Like, so they would create these chants that are called sutra, and then you would repeat the chant until you memorize it, and then you train new monks or whoever who the new person that carries on information to chant the exact same way. And then about, I think, 600 years or so after the Buddha's death, these chants were written down for the first time in Sri Lanka. So there's like the country prides itself in being the inheritance
Yeah.
inheritors of the original word of Buddha.
Right. And there's a couple things about this that are interesting that I'll come back to. So one is, along with being the inheritors of this, they also have the Bodhi tree, right?
Yes.
Which is the tree under which Buddha is in theory attained enlightenment. Now, the second thing about your personal story is that you're not a normal Sri Lankan, right? I mean, you're well, they force rank, and there's 30 million people in Sri Lanka, or at least at the time that you were growing up. They force rank all of the students, right, based on their scores.
Yeah.
And what was your score?
I was one of the top in my age.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is like, at the time, basically the size of the state of California, and being, number one student in the state. I mean, it's extraordinary. So here we have you, and you're thinking about this at an age where I'm thinking about, like, what is my favorite colored crayon? And so there's a lot of years that you put into this, and actually knowing that the tradition in its original form, without all these translations, like I have to learn it in English after it had been translated into Tibetan and all these other things. So there's a lot of loss that happened here. But I want to come back to one, if you're brilliant and you're trying to figure out how to have sort of a lossless way of propagating information through time, chanting and memorization, and doing it in groups that would do natural error correction is probably the most efficient way, or maybe even one of the only ways, to ensure that the original teachings don't get lost.
Absolutely. This is like really, really fascinating, something that I think about a lot. In general, right? Like there was the Buddha, but then there were probably like many intellectuals that were randomly born into these societies, and somehow were lucky enough. Like in the case of Buddha, he was the son of one of the most prosperous little kingdoms in India at the time, and as a result, he had the best education, also the kind of the peace of mind and all that to kind of philosophize and ponder and think about the universe and stuff like that. I'm sure there were multiple philosophers in in the Roman tradition and so on that had similar situations, but then you're surrounded by people who peasants and so on who are just like kind of really trying to survive their day-to-day life, and half their children are dying at the time because child mortality was like 50%, which is wild. And these people had no patience really for like philosophizing and thinking about nature of the universe. And so someone like Buddha probably had to figure out a way to communicate these deep truths that he has observed, and hopefully try to pass it on to future generations. So how do you do that, right? How do you do that? It's like such a conundrum. There's like no writing. How do you do that? So exactly like you're saying, what he probably came up with and what ended up becoming Buddhism was that, hey, like, why don't I create find a bunch of disciples and teach them these techniques, and then also like I'll teach them these chants, and I'll kind of encode this information in these chants so that it's passed on, at least what's really important, and this message is delivered to us 2,000 years later to try to decode. And of course there's a possibility that the Buddha was just like some guy who was just like trying to some egotistical guy who's trying to start a religion or whatever. But then there's this intriguing possibility that, especially given the deep truths that we know by experience and experimentation, that he did stumble upon some really cool shit, right? And then what if this other stuff he's talking about is also there's truth to it, particularly this thing around rebirth, which is very, very, really, really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, so two things on this. One, and I remember you sharing this to me, and at the moment I heard it, it sounded revolutionary and then immediately obvious. It was like Buddha was a genius.
Yeah.
Right? Like, here's this guy in a time before science.
Yeah.
Just literally empirically testing the nature of consciousness and his reality by trying all of this different stuff. And then he figures out, here are the things that work to understand the nature of reality. And I now have to take this instruction set, and there's no scientific method or things like that, or ways of writing stuff down. I mean, he's literally containing all of this in his head, which is incredible. And then he's trying to make it relatable to the audience of 2,000 years ago, right? And so there's metaphors and things like that, which were extremely relevant then, in some cases much less relevant now, and we have to do this translation function. But when I think about, you and I share the privilege of being surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the world. I mean, they're people that it's just jaw-dropping the way they're able to think and the level of horsepower they have. Buddha would probably be right there and would talk in a totally different way to them than what we get in these teachings as we try to uncover them and unpack what they are.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think it actually goes beyond. I mean, look, we all understand the nature of the existential dilemma, right? And like, just people are familiar with thinking about like, why am I here, and why do I exist, and all these things. And so someone like Buddha, being a brilliant guy, he probably wasn't just thinking about like the meditation and all that stuff, but also he was probably thinking about nature holistically. And there are analogies. There are Epicureanism, for example, ancient Greek and Roman teachings. This guy Epicurus who came up with Epicureanism, and he talks about, he was an atomist. He was one of the original atomists in the sense that he believed that the world is made of atoms, right? And he describes how he came to this conclusion. He describes how he was observing how dust particles are moving around in a sunbeam, right? He's observing this, and he's concluding, and through these observations like this, he concluded that the world is made of atoms, which is completely wild, that he was able to come to this conclusion way before we had any evidence of atoms, right? And so, similarly, another idea that that we attribute to Charles Darwin, which is evolution, natural evolution, and evolution, however, is not like, I mean, Darwin is the person to codify it, right? Explain how it actually works. But the idea has existed since the beginning of time. And Buddha, someone like Buddha, probably was able to observe that, hey, like, there's a bunch of monkeys around, and I look like a monkey, like everyone, like all the humans look like a monkey, right? And then they're like this, like, kind of progression of similarities, and we probably, this, we probably related, we probably evolved from each other, right? And these are conclusions that people did come to way before modern science confirmed it. It was just that this was not, the common belief, but like some really smart people had access to these intuitions. And my belief is that that Buddha indeed did figure out this stuff, and perhaps even figured out some insanely deeper truths. Should we talk about, Ben, some of the other things that the Buddha has talked about, where he's talked about these other realms?
Well, I think before we get into that, I'd want to hear just a couple of things that you get into, a couple of things you and I have empirically tested of the Buddha's teachings, because to me, there's so little that's understood, right? In the West, we've gotten mindfulness, right? And huge praise to John Kabat-Zinn for creating that word and helping people to understand it and understand this, the stress relief benefits of that. But most people think that that's the whole point of meditation, and it's really not. It's sort of like table stakes. It's like,
Yes.
a baby learning to crawl compared to what you can do. So what are some of the one or two of the standout things for you from the Buddhist teachings that you've empirically tested and led to
I think what I've
surprising
empirically
results?
tested is, so there's, I think, like maybe two questions there: what I've empirically tested, and what is the Buddhist teaching about. I think meditation, for me personally, um, I've been a practitioner of meditation, I would say almost all my life, and I've done like multiple meditation retreats, like the Vipassana retreats that are 10-day silent retreats and so on. And when you do this with that kind of intensity, you really come to appreciate the subtle kind of nature of how thoughts arise and how thoughts lead to more thoughts, and sort of like the continuation of self and consciousness and all that stuff. And it's an incredible experience. And also, the to take the Matrix analogy, right? Like that there's no spoon, right? Like that reality is really kind of perception, at least from oneself's point of view, and so on. So there are some deep truths that I've been lucky to, I think, observe. And then, so that's sort of like where I would put where my experience has been. But then there's also the ultimate goal of Buddhist meditation. Again, like you're saying, mindfulness is the watered down, sort of like very practical, very important kind of Western take on it. But the Buddhist goal of meditation is essentially extinguishing self, right? Nirvana is the idea that you stop the cycle of rebirth. And now that's interesting. That's interesting to think about from an information theoretic point of view. Like, if your self, if your consciousness, if your being is a computer that is like processing, computing, and if there's some kind of information passage that happens at your death, what you're trying to stop is this passage of information, right? And so that is a really fascinating thing to dig into.
Yeah. So a couple of things on this, and then one I want to challenge you on. So my own experience, and I just want to land this for people who are listening. There's certain things that are promised by these Buddhist practices that I think the common understanding is they're very far away. like an example of this is being able to stabilize your conscious attention on one object indefinitely, right? The the Buddhist monks staring at a candle flame and holding that, or things like that. And most people think, oh, that's 40 years of meditation. And I can personally report for myself that with the right instruction, you can get there in a day and a half. And I've been there and can just stabilize my attention. And I've witnessed hundreds of other people be able to do that and get to a place where you can do that effortlessly, right? Within days. Another one is a lot of folks talk about these experiences of oneness, right? That feeling of that consciousness is co-arising with everything else and all things are one. And again, I've seen hundreds of people stabilize that, or have at least a taste of that within 5 to 6 days, right? They just aren't far away. And these are things that, there's if you were looking at it like an experiment, it's a replicable experiment. There's a hypothesis of what you'll experience. There's a specific set of steps that you follow.
Yeah.
And then you can evaluate whether you had that experience, and people do. And it's really, really not that hard. I mean, it's hard, but not nearly as hard as people think. And so to me, that's what gives me confidence when I think about the Buddha talking about rebirth in this way. And it's like, well, why would he be right about all this other stuff and then wrong about that one
exactly
thing?
So my sort of proof from deduction, or whatever, is deduction the right word? Like, why should you trust the Buddha, right? Like when he talks about that maybe there's some form of rebirth happening, why should you trust him? What my answer would be exactly what you're talking about, right? Like, so unlike any other sort of nut job philosopher who claims that just like that someone says that there's a flying spaghetti monster, like how do you test it? There's no way to test it. Right. Except with Buddha's philosophy, you can actually, maybe you don't need to become the Buddha. You can go 5% of the way there, 3%, 2%, 1% of the way there, and test out whether what he's saying holds truth, right? And as both you and I have experienced, and countless others, is that when you do traverse this path of purifying your mind, what you are likely to become is less likely to make shit up, right? Like you become more wanting and to inherently be in touch with the true nature of reality, not necessarily it's not a journey towards fattening your ego. It's a journey towards sort of dissolving your ego and sort of like detaching yourself from needing to build a cult or whatever, right? So then you have to question the person who made the ultimate journey on this path, the Buddha himself, who went to the very end of this journey and realized all these things. Why would this person then lie about just this one little thing, which is rebirth, in a very specific way, right? He didn't even didn't even adopt the rebirth concept that already existed. He had to make up some very precise, specific, nuanced take on rebirth that sounds like this passage of information, and then and with our modern really last 10 years understanding of how the brain really works, which is much like a deep learned neural net, right? Which is all just also information. Now you have some intriguing possibilities that we should really be thinking about. Like, did this guy really figure out something here? Like, is there some kind of weight transfer happening at depth? Like, that's fascinating.
A couple of things there. I mean, one, maybe Buddha was just, had a great sense of humor. And he was, it's like, hey, I'm going to leave in this one cosmic joke for people that get this far in the path. Just kidding. There's no rebirth. This is it. No, I don't know about that. But two things on this. One is it's fascinating to take these concepts that have been sort of trapped in spirituality and often wrapped in religion, and often wrapped in sort of, at least in California where we are, woo, and then port them over, as you're doing, into math and science, right? I mean, there's a way where I think you and I believe that the universe can be explained in quite a beautiful way just through math, right?
Sure.
That everything backs up into concepts like information transfer or information processing. So maybe you can unpack. You've used the word weights a couple of times, and what do you mean by that for most folks to understand? What does that mean, that the information is just weights?
The way to explain this would be that um, what is an LLM? What is a neural net? Fundamentally, there's an input and then there's an output, and then how is the output constructed based on the input? The input is sent through a network of nodes, and each node is essentially a mathematical function, where, if the input to this node is, say, 1, the node might output 0.5 or 0.3 or whatever, right? And so that number is decided by something called the weight in the node, and just like it's just like, yeah, and it's like a probability weight, right? And so so when you have an array of nodes, thousands, millions, billions, turns out you can train this network by you know by um, essentially matching, like, known inputs to known outputs, essentially, and you do this over and over, where you train the neural network, and then you essentially get a large distribution of weights across each node, and then
I'm sorry, I'm not you. This is such a great, perfect technical explanation. I think a simpler way of talking about it is it's just the likelihood that something is going to occur.
Sure. Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
So, my girlfriend does this all the time. Right. She tries to finish my sentences.
Yeah.
And most of the time she's wrong. Right. But the brain is essentially this predictive engine. But sometimes she is right. If you're listening to this, it's true. But it's predicting what the next thing is going to be. And it goes, and you could back it out into math. It says, hey, 70% chance if I take this action, this is what will happen. Or, oh, Ben is saying this word, and then the next word is going to be that.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you can play with this is just tickling, right? Like, it's really hard to tickle yourself because you're so good at predicting how it will feel that your body understands, like, oh, this is where the sensation I'm going to experience. It predicts that. It's largely accurate. You don't feel tickled, but if someone else does it to you, your prediction of exactly what they're going to do next is off. And so you experience this delta between your prediction algorithm in your brain and the reality, or the
Sure.
weights in your brain. So yeah, is that I don't know if that's better. But so coming back to bridging tickling back into Rebirth, it's essentially this predictive algorithm that is somehow encapsulated in your neural connections. Some aspect of that is being transferred.
Yeah. So I think the TLDR here is that it as much effort and infrastructure and all these things it takes to build and run a neural network. Right now, we know this, to create, GPT-4, for example, it was like a $50 million training run, investment of multiple $1 billion, GPUs that take crazy amounts of energy. However, the crux of the thing, right? Like the information that you finally get is essentially like a file, like a text file could be, that just contains the weights of each one of these nodes. And the whole point of this explanation is that an LLM is contained within these weights. It's just like a bunch of information, a bunch of numbers, essentially. As far as we know, the human brain is actually, turns out, very similar, right? And chances are the human brain and all of your kind of self-consciousness is captured in a set of numbers, or could be captured in a set of numbers. And so that is where this idea of thinking of rebirth as information transfer becomes incredibly intriguing, because now you don't need a soul to fly over from one dying body to another dying body for there needs to be a connection between these two living things. It could just be some sort of transfer of weights.
Right. And this sort of relates to I don't know if are you familiar with Donald Hoffman's work and user interface theory?
A little bit.
So he's an evolutionary biologist. I think he's down at UC Irvine, and he became interested in this sort of core tenet of evolutionary biology, which was this idea that the more accurately a being or a creature could perceive reality, the better it would do at surviving and thriving. Mm-hmm. Right. So in other words, through the evolutionary process, our eyes, for example, got extremely good at perceiving reality accurately, and that's why we were better hunters than some of our evolutionary predecessors. And he began to wonder about that and go, is that actually accurate? And so there's that whole digital simulation, the game of life, right? And the idea is that you sort of abstract life back into like winning utils of utility, or you sleep, food, sex, right? And he began doing these experiments where you had one set of creatures that were evolved to see things as clearly as possible, as accurately as possible, and then another set of creatures of equal intelligence, but optimized for these rewards of food, sex, and sleep. And by far the second category just beat the pants off those that saw it accurately. And you can sort of analyze how likely it is from this that we've evolved to see things accurately. And the answer is it's statistically almost, it's not,
sure.
It's extremely unlikely, right? So in other words, the way that we're interacting with reality, and he posits that even the base physics that we are in, Newtonian mechanics and may just be an interface that whatever we are doing, that is our consciousness that's processing information, has actually no relationship to the information that's happening underneath the surface. And so it could be, in our physics, a very hard thing to think about. How do we transfer information from, say, my brain into a new child's brain, but totally trivial in whatever the underlying substrate is of reality.
It is that is the intriguing possibility. And and I think, like, since we talked about Buddhism, I think the final nugget here that I personally find, at least one of the nuggets that's really fascinating, is that in Buddhism, Buddha always also talks about these realms that he talks about two types of realms that he's observed, called Deva and Brahma. And what's really fascinating is that he describes these realms as, like, in Deva realm, there are beings that live for very, very long lifetimes, like lifespans, and it's like a post, it's like a godlike realm where it's post scarcity, and you can have whatever you want type thing. And then Brahma realms, he describes as realms where where beings are in a permanent state of meditation, is how it's described, right? Like it's like a permanent state of meditation where it's almost like a hibernation type state. And this makes me wonder, is he talking about some sort of like a distribution of essentially different habitable planets in intelligence essentially existing in different states, right? And Earth itself so far was like, the Earth that we know and love, where like, evolution happened, and starting with like single cell life forms, um uh, life grew to what it is today. And this is like kind of the typical realm where like you just like kind of there's a lot of suffering and so on. But then at some point technological singularity happens, right, that we're all excited about. And one possibility that we all hope for is that we would soon be entering a situation on Earth itself where there would be like a post-scarcity type life, and like longevity, life extension, robots, AI, AGI. All this leads to a very Deva-like realm, essentially, right?
Dylan, you can finally have all the robots you ever wanted.
Yeah, all the robots, all the chocolate, and all the whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating. And so this is almost like this is one of the things that intrigues me the most, right? Like, is this the solution to the Fermi paradox, that does the universe or multiple universe essentially consist of three types of worlds? One type of world is that where we have been, which is where evolution is happening, and it's on a journey, a long journey towards essentially AGI. And then second type of world, AGI has happened, and then people are living very long lifespans, and like in sort of like kind of like a godlike existence. And the third type of world where all of this kind of comes to a type of conclusion where no one can really keep existing because it kind of at least gets boring. So maybe there's a bunch of AIs in hibernation. So that would be a really, really fascinating thing to have happened.
All right. Well, I can't wait to get into this. I think we're gonna have to leave our listeners with a cliffhanger here
Yeah.
as we wrap up this episode. So we wanted to add a little segment called the Hack of the Week. And so, Dylan, why don't you give us the quick hack of the week here?
Hack of the week, baby. We're all about hacking life, hacking biology, hacking everything. So it's great. So yeah, we wanted to have this segment and share some of our favorite learnings, life hacks, and we'd love to hear your life hacks as well. The thing I want to talk about this week is something I started doing this week consistently, which is cold plunging. It's something that I've done in the past, but I bought a cold plunge. Finally, I wanted to do this because I keep hearing about the mental health benefits from my friends. And now I have got this cold tub bed set to 45 degrees, and I go sit in it every morning at 7:30 a.m. First thing I do when I wake up, and it's cold as fuck, and I'm like screaming inside my head. But it feels amazing for like 4 hours after, which is the most incredible thing. Yeah, that's the hack of the week. And I actually did have a small hack here as well, something that I do when I cold plunge to make it easier, which is, there's a book called Untethered Soul that I really like, and the crux of the book is that, hey, like, you are not your body. You can sort of like, you can observe pain but not attach to it, right? And pain or pleasure, sensation. And so you can sort of like stay untethered from your physical body, kind of thing. And while you're cold plunging, it's a great time to practice that, sort of imagining that you exist outside of your body. And that one thing makes cold plunging so much easier and makes it possible for you to cold plunge for way longer. So that would be my hack of the week.
Yeah, I recommend that, or just shift into awakened awareness if that's available, and become one with everything. So cold plunging is just a tiny little blip in the ocean. I think that the one thing that I would add, because of course no one's ever heard of cold plunging before now, is that a brief one before bed, or at least enough to sort of trigger the release of norepinephrine in the brain, has been a hack that I've been using over the last year in order to sort of shut off my brain. Sometimes my mind will ruminate late at night, and so if I just 10 seconds, my body goes and then
Interesting. So does that improve your sleep?
Tremendously, right? So sometimes if I feel like I've got a lot on my mind and I can't go to sleep, sometimes I do it just with like a quick shower where I have a warm shower, and I'm not trying to fully change my body's core temperature, because that could disrupt your ability to sleep, but just enough to trigger the shock in the body and the norepinephrine rush, and then my brain goes, oh, okay, we're gonna die, so I need to focus, and then it stops all those thoughts, and then I go back to warm, and then I go to sleep.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So thank you for listening to another exciting episode, hopefully, of Almost Got It. And please subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, and give us a like on Twitter, retweet, comment. Please engage. Tell us what you like, what you didn't like. I would love to keep bringing information on breaking science tech news stories, as well as our take on spirituality and consciousness based on all of that to you. See you next week.